Now this is about the Black Power salute at the Mexico Olympics in 1968. As you'll know, and I've said to you many, many times, this is now seen as an iconic gesture of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. But there's a lot you need to remember for this, but just try and remember it as a story, because if you remember the story, you'll be able to understand why they did it and what the consequences of it were. Usually these questions come up as a why, so do not forget to mention in these answers why they actually bothered to do this type of protest. So what happened was, before the Mexico Olympics of 1968, there was two really, really fast sprinters, and this was Tommie Smith and John Carlos. The times that ran that year suggested they would probably do very, very, very well at the Olympic Games. And originally they thought possibly about boycotting the Olympics because they didn't feel they got treated well enough at home in America because they were black. The problem is, as I've told you before in class, is if you boycott something, in the end people just remember the people who actually went to the Olympics and what they did and what they achieved. So it was decided in the end that if they were fast enough to get on the podium, they should really go to the Olympic Games, and that's exactly what they did. So in the 200 metres, Tommie Smith won gold and John Carlos came third. This gave them a perfect opportunity on a world stage to show people what they had managed to achieve as black African Americans and to make some sort of protest. Unfortunately, something that was really frowned upon was doing any type of political protest at the Olympic Games, because this shouldn't be allowed. The next thing you need to remember about this is you need to remember the protest itself. So what happened was they went up onto the podium and they were given their medals. But as they got onto the podium, neither of them were wearing shoes. They only went on with the socks on. And this was purely to show black poverty in America, okay, that they weren't rich enough to have shoes because of how badly they were treated in America. You also need to remember that they also wore, one of them wore, John Carlos wore some beads, and so did Tommie Smith, but you couldn't see them under his scarf, because the scarf Tommie Smith wore was for black pride, and the beads that John Carlos wore were to show about the lynchings in America and also them being chained on the Middle Passage. All of this is very, very symbolic. They also wore one glove each, one on the right hand and one on the left hand, and when they put their hands in the air, this was the Black Power salute, it showed the arc of power. All of this was linked to black power, and the idea that they were good enough to be able to win medals for America, but when they get home, they would still be treated like dirt. So it highlighted black poverty, which is the reason why they did it. They also did it to embarrass the American government, and they also did it to get publicity on a world stage. Because remember, at the Olympics, billions of people watched the Olympic Games. So everybody would have been able to see just what these people were going through. Now the reaction may have taken them aback slightly because they were booed when they came off the podium, and they would have expected some of that, but possibly they might have expected some type of support, and they hoped that black America would understand what they did tonight. Unfortunately, the opposite was true. Both black and white America frowned on what they'd done. White Americans were annoyed because obviously it embarrassed them and how they treated black people at home, but the black Americans were scared that maybe it was a gesture too far. Remember, in the 1960s, a lot of changes happened for civil rights, and there has been some lasting change. So now, with the government who've actually been helping to try and change some things for black people, they've now embarrassed them. So black America thought that maybe they shouldn't have used the Olympic Games as a place to protest. So what happened was, when they came off the podium, they weren't allowed to go back to the Olympic Village. They were banned from the Olympic Village, and soon after they were banned from the American team. They also, at a later date, were stripped of the medals, and what this was showing people was that they weren't going to stand for any type of political protest at the Olympic Games. When Tommie Smith was interviewed about why he did what he did, he basically says to the interviewer that if he does something good, he's an American, and if he does something bad, then he's black. And that did resound with a lot of people, but at the time, the press was really, really negative. They did get a lot of publicity, but when they returned home to disgraceful headlines, and also the family got death threats, and so did the two athletes that had been involved. So there were some major, major problems straight after this happened. But in the long run, it was a really, really important thing that they'd done in the Mexico Olympics in 1968. It's now seen as an iconic symbol for civil rights because they wanted to draw attention to the civil rights programme and also to the problems that were still facing black Americans at home. Another reason why it was a success in the end was in 1984, Tommie Smith and John Carlos were allowed to train sprinters for the Los Angeles Olympics and also helped to organise the Games. This shows that America had forgiven them, and actually they did realise why they had actually done it. They'd done it with the best of intentions. These two people are held up as heroes, and something that's always nice to remember as well is the Australian who came second, Peter Norman, who came out in support of them wearing a badge to show that he also agreed with what they were standing for. When he died a few years ago of cancer, they went all the way over to Australia and they carried his coffin because they might have lost their sprinting careers, but also he was told off by the Australian team and he pretty much sacrificed his career just to show support for them for what they did in the Olympics. So remember, the short-term consequences are very, very negative for them. They really are, even from black America. But the longer-term consequences are much, much more significant because it shows that people realised that they did what they did for a reason. And remember to say why they did actually do it, to draw attention to the problem still facing them over civil rights in America.